She texted me from my husband's phone at 2 in the morning, told me he was hers now, said don't wait up. I sent back 7 words and went to make coffee. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her for 6 weeks. She showed up at my door that night wearing a smile like she'd already won. That smile didn't last long.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The phone buzzed at 2:14 in the morning. I know that time exactly because I looked at the clock on the nightstand before I even reached for it. That's habit. I work in hospital contracts administration. I have been on call for urgent situations at odd hours for 11 years. When something wakes me up in the middle of the night, the first thing I do is check the time, because time matters when things go wrong. Darius had been gone since 6 the evening before. Said he had a proposal to finish, quarterly review prep. His boss had called an all-hands push for the biggest client pitch of the year, and everyone on his team was expected to put in the hours. That was the story. I had heard versions of that story a lot over the past year and a half. I picked up the phone expecting something work-related, a vendor issue, a flagged contract clause, something that needed my eyes and not just a callback in the morning. What I saw was my husband's name at the top of the screen, but the sending line underneath it said Renee Okafor. Renee Okafor was Darius's boss, vice president of strategic development at the consulting firm where he'd been working for the past 18 months. The woman he mentioned in almost every story about his job, usually to explain why something was delayed, or why he had to stay late, or why a particular weekend trip had been pushed back again. Renee needed this. Renee changed that. Renee decided. The message itself was 12 words. He's with me tonight. He's where he belongs. Don't wait up. I read it once, then again, then a third time, the way you reread something when your brain keeps refusing to process what your eyes are clearly seeing. She had picked up his phone, scrolled to my name, typed that out, and pressed send. That was not a mistake. That was not autocorrect. That was not a misdirected message meant for someone else. That was a woman telling me something deliberately, in the middle of the night, using my husband's device to do it. She wanted me to know she had access to him. She wanted me to feel it. I sat up in bed and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I typed back 7 words. Keep him. We are done. Goodbye. I hit send, watched it deliver, watched it show as read almost immediately. I set the phone face down on the nightstand, went downstairs and made coffee. I was on my second cup when I heard the car. It was almost 2:45 by then. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the overhead light off and just a small lamp above the stove on, the way I sit when I need to think without the room feeling too bright or too awake. The coffee was helping. My hands had stopped shaking around the halfway point of the first cup. I heard the engine cut, then 2 car doors, then footsteps on the front walkway, 2 sets, one heavier and one lighter, moving at different speeds like they weren't quite walking together. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. Darius was standing slightly behind and to the left. His shirt was untucked. His tie was gone entirely. His face had that particular look I had seen exactly twice before in 11 years of knowing him. Once when his father had a health scare, and once when he lost a major client account and had to tell me about it before I heard from someone else. It was the face of a man who knows he is about to face something he cannot talk his way out of. Renee Okafor was standing directly in front of the door. She was composed. That was the first thing I noticed. It was almost 3 in the morning, and she looked like she had stepped out of a business lunch. Suit jacket still on, posture straight, and she was smiling. Not the nervous, apologetic smile of someone who had made a terrible mistake and was now at my door hoping to explain herself. No. This was the smile of someone who believed she had already won. She wanted me to open the door and see it. That was why she came. She wanted to stand in front of me and let me understand with my own eyes that she had taken something and was not sorry about it. I opened the door all the way. I did not open it a crack. I did not peer around the edge or stand behind it. I opened it fully and stood in the frame and looked at both of them in the porch light and did not say a single word. Darius started talking before I could. The words came out fast and tangled, the way they do when someone has been rehearsing in the car and still isn't ready. It was a mistake. It didn't mean what I thought. They had been working late, and things had gotten out of hand just once, and he was so sorry. And could we please talk? Could I please just let him explain? Renee said nothing. She just stood there, watching me, assessing. The smile had gone slightly still, the way a smile does when the person wearing it is recalculating. She had expected tears. She had expected me to crumble in the doorway, or scream or slam the door, or beg Darius to come back inside. She had built this whole midnight performance around a version of me she had invented in her head, a woman who would fall apart when confronted with her loss. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I stepped back from the door. "Come inside," I said, "both of you. We're not doing this on the front porch." Let me back up. My name is Simone. I am 38 years old. I work in contracts administration for a hospital system in a mid-sized southern city, which means I spend my days reviewing language that most people's eyes glaze over, catching the kinds of discrepancies that cost institutions money and sometimes cost people more than that. I am good at my job because I do not assume good intentions when the language on paper tells me something different. I follow what is documented, not what someone claims they meant. I met Darius at a friend's birthday dinner 9 years ago. He was funny in the specific way that draws you in slowly. Not the loudest person in the room, but the one who said the thing that made everyone pause and then laugh harder than they expected to. We dated for 2 years and were married for 6.5 before the night I just described. For most of that time, we were good, not perfect, good, solid. The kind of marriage where you still choose each other, even when things are inconvenient, which I believed meant something. 18 months ago, he took the position at the consulting firm. Senior project lead, significant salary bump, the kind of title he had been working toward for years. I was happy for him. I threw him a small celebration dinner. I told everyone I knew. What changed didn't change all at once. It was gradual. The way water damage in a wall looks fine from the outside until one day you press your hand against it and feel the give. He started working later, then traveling more. The trips to Atlanta, to Charlotte, to Dallas, always with the same team, always with Renee's name attached to the itinerary. His phone became something he kept angled away from me. Not obviously, not dramatically, but consistently. The kind of consistent you notice after a while and then try not to notice because noticing means you have to do something about it. I told myself it was the job. New pressure, new expectations, new pace. He had always wanted recognition, and this position finally gave him a path to it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things. I was wrong about some of them. I was right about one. The first real moment was a Thursday evening in January. Darius had worn his gray wool overcoat to a client dinner the weekend before. He'd hung it by the door when he came in, and it had been there since Saturday. I was taking it to the dry cleaner, and I checked the pockets first the way I always do, because he is a man who leaves things in pockets. The first pocket had his transit card, a crumpled receipt from a coffee shop, and a stick of gum. The second pocket had a different receipt, folded in half. From a men's boutique fragrance counter downtown. $220 for a bottle of something called Santal Lumiere. I had never heard of it. I looked it up on my phone while standing in the entryway with my coat still on. It was a very specific kind of cologne, the kind of thing someone buys because someone else told them it was attractive on them. Not the kind of thing Darius had ever purchased in 9 years of knowing him. He wore the same 2 colognes, both of which I had helped him pick out. Behind the receipt, tucked flat against the lining, was a card, small, the kind that comes with flowers. I opened it. It was blank inside except for 3 words in handwriting I did not recognize. You were wonderful. That was all. No name, no signature, just those 3 words in ink that curved slightly upward toward the right, the way some people's handwriting does when they're writing quickly and feeling something good. I stood in my entryway for about 90 seconds. Then I put the card back exactly where I found it, put the receipt back on top of it, put the coat in the dry cleaning bag, dropped it off on my way to work, never mentioned it to Darius. But I did not stop thinking about it. 6 weeks before the text, the firm hosted a quarterly celebration dinner. Darius had been asking me to come to more of his work events, which I now understand was probably an attempt to present a version of his life that looked normal and intact. At the time, I thought it was a genuine invitation. I went. I wore my burgundy wrap dress. I got there on time. Renee Okafor introduced herself about 20 minutes in. She came over to where I was standing with a small group, slid into the conversation smoothly, shook my hand with a firm grip, and said something pleasant and completely forgettable about how often she'd heard about me. Her smile was warm and easy for everyone in that circle, except when she looked at me directly. Then it went just slightly flat. Not unfriendly enough to name, not obvious enough to mention to anyone, just a degree or two cooler than everything else, the way a draft feels in a room where all the windows look closed. About 40 minutes later, I was talking to another spouse across the room, and I looked up and saw Darius and Renee standing near the bar. They were in a conversation with 2 other people. Nothing about it looked unusual. Then Renee put her hand on Darius's arm, just briefly, not intimate. But she looked directly at me while she did it, held eye contact for 1 full second, then looked away. It was so quick that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. But I did not blink. I excused myself from the conversation I was in and went to the restroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for 30 seconds. Then I dried my hands and went back out and finished the evening because I was not going to give her anything to see. We drove home separately because I'd come from a work appointment. In my car alone, I gave myself exactly 10 minutes to feel every single thing I had been suppressing for months. Then I pulled into our driveway, went inside, kissed my husband on the cheek, and told him I was tired. The next morning, I made a call. My coworker, Deja, had mentioned a woman named Paulette Webb once, offhandedly, during a conversation about a family legal situation that had since resolved. Former insurance fraud investigator. She had gone independent about 4 years prior. Deja described her as thorough, affordable, and completely uninterested in drama, just in facts. I found Deja's text where she'd shared the contact. I went into my car during my lunch break. I called from my personal cell phone with my windows up. Paulette answered on the second ring. She asked me 2 questions. First, do you want to know what's happening, or do you want documentation that can be used legally? I said both, if possible. She said fine. Second, do you have a budget ceiling? I told her. She said she could work within it. That was the whole conversation. No speech about discretion, no dramatic promises. She just said she'd be in touch within the week with an initial approach and to text her a recent photo of my husband and the name of his employer. I went back inside and ate my lunch at my desk and reviewed 3 vendor contracts before my afternoon meeting. That night, I cooked dinner, watched television with Darius, and went to bed at my normal time. He kissed my temple before I fell asleep. I let him. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning, a secure file link arrived in my email with a short message from Paulette. First report attached. Call me after you've looked. I opened it at my kitchen table before Darius was awake. The file had 23 photographs, timestamps on everyone, location data embedded in the metadata. Paulette had included a typed summary at the front. 1 page, clinical language, no editorializing. The first photograph was from a Tuesday evening 4 weeks prior. Darius had told me he had a late internal meeting that ran into dinner. The photo showed him and Renee at an Italian restaurant across town that I had driven past 100 times and never eaten at, sitting across from each other at a corner table, close enough that their hands were touching on top of the tablecloth. The second set was from the Charlotte trip. He had told me he was presenting solo to a regional client. The hotel confirmation Paulette had sourced showed a suite booked under the company account. The photos showed them both entering the hotel at 9:47 in the evening, and the door log showed a single room accessed through the night. I looked at each photo once. Then I closed the laptop. I made the bed. I showered. I ironed a blouse. I drove to work and was at my desk by 8:15, which was normal. I said good morning to the 3 people I passed in the hallway, and I meant it, or at least I produced something that resembled meaning it well enough. At 12:30, I went to the parking garage to eat a sandwich in my car, and that is when I cried, not the collapsing kind. The quiet, controlled kind where you press your fingers against your eyes and breathe through your nose and give yourself a set amount of time because you have to go back inside in 20 minutes and you cannot let this follow you into the building. I gave myself 15 minutes. Then I called Paulette and said, "Keep going." Paulette located her in early February. Her name was Gwendolyn. She had worked in communications at Renee's previous company for 4 years before Renee was brought on as a department head. Gwendolyn's husband, a project coordinator named Marcus, had been on Renee's team. Within 8 months, the marriage was in pieces. Gwendolyn had filed a workplace misconduct complaint. The company had settled quietly and sealed everything under a non-disclosure agreement. Renee had moved to her current firm 6 months later with a letter of recommendation signed by the same CEO who had approved the settlement. Paulette told me Gwendolyn had recorded voicemails. She had screenshots. She had a personal journal she'd kept during the months when she was still trying to understand what was happening to her marriage. She was willing to meet. We met at a diner on a Saturday morning. Gwendolyn was composed and tired in the way that people are after they've already done their crying on a particular subject. She laid everything out, what she had, how she had saved it, why she hadn't been able to use it before. I drove home feeling, for the first time, like I had something solid to stand on. 2 days later, Paulette called me at 7 in the morning. Gwendolyn's ex-husband's divorce attorney had reached out to Gwendolyn. Someone had tipped him off that she was speaking to people about a period of time covered by her NDA. The attorney reminded her of the financial penalties she had agreed to. Gwendolyn called Paulette that evening and said she was sorry. She couldn't risk it. She had a daughter. She had a mortgage. She had rebuilt a life that this could dismantle. She was out. I sat with that for a long time. I had spent 3 weeks building toward that evidence, and it was gone in a phone call. I was back to what Paulette had documented directly, which was real and solid, but which was also just my husband's affair, not a pattern. Without Gwendolyn, I had a cheating spouse. With her, I had something larger. I needed a different route. I called my sister Tamara the morning after the text, before Darius had come downstairs, before anything else had happened. Tamara is 42. She is 3 years older than me, and she has been the person I called first in a crisis my entire adult life. She was the one who drove 6 hours when I had a pregnancy scare 6 years ago. She was the one who sat with me when Darius and I went through a hard patch in year 3. I thought I knew what I would get when I dialed her number. She picked up immediately, voice still thick from sleep. I told her in 2 sentences what had happened, the text, my response, that they had shown up at my door. There was a pause. Then she said, "Slow down. Tell me exactly what the message said." I told her exactly what it said. Another pause. Then, "Okay, but Simone, before you do anything permanent, are you sure you're reading this right?" I said I was reading it with my own eyes. She said she understood that, but she also said that sometimes things look like one thing and turn out to be something else. that marriages were complicated, that Darius had his issues, but he loved me. She believed that maybe the woman was out of line, but people said things in the moment. That divorce was a long road, and I should think carefully before I started walking it. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Tamara, he was with her tonight. She sent me a message from his phone to tell me so. This is not a misunderstanding. She got quiet again. And then she said something she probably should have kept to herself. She said, I just don't want you to blow up your whole life over one night, Simone. Some of us didn't have a choice about starting over. You still do. And there it was. Tamara had been divorced for 4 years. Her ex had been unfaithful, and she had left, and she had struggled. Financially, emotionally, in ways I had watched from close enough to know how hard it had been. She had rebuilt herself, and I was proud of her for it. But somewhere in her, she had filed away the fact that her little sister had never had to do that, had never had her life fall apart in a visible way, had always been the one with the stable job and the good marriage, and the house that didn't need anything fixed right now. She wasn't being cruel. She was being human. But it meant that her first instinct when my life showed a crack was not to stand beside me in it. I told her I would call her later. I didn't call her back for 2 weeks. I sent Darius upstairs. He started to protest, and I looked at him the way I look at a vendor who has brought me a contract with fraudulent line items. Not angry, just completely certain of what I am seeing. And he went. I turned to Renee. She had moved to the center of my living room while I was handling Darius. She had her arms crossed and her weight settled back slightly, the way someone stands when they are trying to project that they are comfortable in a space that does not belong to them. The smile was gone. She was recalibrating. I sat down in the chair across from her, not across the room, close enough that she couldn't look anywhere without looking at me. You expected me to fall apart? I said. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I said, you came here at 2 a.m. You used his phone so I would see your name. You stood on my front porch smiling. That's not someone who made a mistake and is here to apologize. That's someone who came to deliver a message. She was quiet. I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. How many times have you done this? Something moved across her face. It was fast, a quarter second, maybe less. But I have spent 11 years in rooms where people are trying not to show me what's in their contracts, and I know what a flinch looks like when someone is working hard to suppress it. She recovered quickly, said something about consenting adults and choices, and how this was between her and Darius, and the fact that I had ended my marriage via text message already made it clear where I stood. I let her finish. Then I said, I've been looking at you for 6 weeks, Renee. Not Darius. You. And what I've found is that this is not the first time you have done something like this. The composure slipped again, this time a little further and a little longer. I told her what I had, not all of it. Enough. I told her Paulette's name. I told her what Paulette did and how long she had been doing it. I told her about the photographs, the restaurant, the hotel in Charlotte, the documentation that was time-stamped and geotagged and stored in multiple locations. I told her that Paulette had located women from her previous company, and that 2 of them had already provided written statements about what had happened to their marriages. That last part was not entirely true yet, but it was going to be true, and I have learned in contract work that sometimes you tell people the version that reflects where things are heading rather than where they currently stand, especially when the other party is deciding whether to cooperate. Renee's face had gone through several things by the time I finished. Disbelief, calculation, something that might have been fear. She said, you cannot prove a pattern. You have photographs of a personal relationship between 2 adults. That's not misconduct. That's a private matter. I said, you are a vice president at your firm. Darius is a direct report to your division. What you're describing as a private matter is what an employment attorney would describe as a significant liability exposure. And your CEO would probably agree. She said she had lawyers. She said she had resources. She said if I tried to make this public, I would be dealing with legal action until I ran out of money to fight it. I let her finish that too. Then I said, "Here's what I'm offering you. You resign Monday morning. You cite personal reasons, family obligations, whatever allows you to exit gracefully. You leave this city and this industry alone, and this stays between us." I paused. Or, I said, "I send everything I have to your CEO, your board, and the women from your previous company who have been waiting for someone else to move first." She stared at me. Then she said, "You're bluffing." I said, "Try me." She left without another word. Her heels on my hardwood floor were sharp and unhesitating all the way to the front door. She pulled it shut behind her without slamming it, which somehow felt more deliberate than if she had. I sat in my chair and listened to her car back out of my driveway. Then I went upstairs, told Darius to sleep in the guest room, locked my bedroom door, and lay on top of the covers until the sun came up. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. 4 days after that conversation, my supervisor called me into her office at 9 in the morning. Her name is Gloria Tatum. She's been in hospital administration for 26 years, and she runs her department with a calm efficiency I have always respected. She closed the door, which she rarely does for routine conversations, and she told me that an anonymous complaint had been filed with HR the previous afternoon. The complaint alleged that I had improperly accessed patient financial records in order to gather information to support a personal legal dispute. I sat very still. The allegation was specific. It referenced a time window. It referenced a category of records. Whoever had filed it knew enough about how my job worked to make the complaint sound credible to someone who didn't know me. I knew immediately. Not because I had evidence in that moment. Just because I knew what I had done to provoke it, and I knew who I had provoked. Renee had made a call. I didn't know who she knew inside the system, or how she'd gotten specific enough information about my role to file something that would trigger a formal review. But someone had given her something, and she had used it. Gloria said she was required by policy to conduct an internal review. She said the review would take approximately 2 weeks. She said I was not being suspended pending the outcome, but that I should be aware the process was formal and documented. I asked if I could say something for the record. She said yes. I said, "The allegation is false. I have not accessed any patient records outside of my authorized scope for any purpose, personal or professional. I will cooperate fully with the review, and I will provide documentation to support that." Gloria looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I know who you are, Simone. I have known you for 9 years, but I have to follow the process." I said, "I know. I'll have my materials to you by end of week." I walked back to my desk, sat down, and spent the next 40 minutes doing absolutely nothing visible while I thought through exactly what I was going to do. I pulled documentation for 11 days, access logs, system timestamps, my authorization scope in writing. Every single record I had touched in the prior 90 days, cross-referenced against my documented work assignments. I requested a meeting with the hospital's compliance officer, not because I was required to, but because walking into that meeting voluntarily and with organized materials communicates something that being reactive does not. I also called a labor attorney named Dennis Park, who came recommended by a friend in the legal department. Not to threaten anyone, just to make sure I was protected if the situation escalated in a direction I wasn't anticipating. I told no one at work what was actually behind the complaint, not because I was ashamed, because I had learned from watching Renee operate that information shared too widely is information you can't control. I kept it between me, Dennis, and Paulette. Those 11 days were the longest stretch of the entire experience. Not because I was afraid of the outcome, I knew what the documentation would show, but because I was doing the slow, unglamorous work of defending myself against a lie while also managing my full caseload and not giving anyone around me a reason to wonder if something was wrong. I took my lunch breaks in the parking garage. I slept about 5 hours a night. I did not contact Darius. I did not contact Renee. I did not reach out to anyone connected to either of them. I just worked the problem. On the 8th day of the review, I woke up at 6 in the morning and came downstairs to make coffee. Darius had been staying in the guest room and mostly keeping out of my way, which was the most useful thing he had done since this began. His work tablet was on the kitchen counter, still on, screen active. I should not have looked. That's the honest thing to say. I should have put it face down and walked away and maintained the clean separation I had been careful to keep. I looked. His email was open, and the most recent sent message was addressed to Renee Okafor. The subject line was, "I need you to stop." I read it. I read it fast because I didn't know when he would come downstairs. He was not asking her to stop what I thought he was asking her to stop. He was not asking her to leave me alone. He was asking her to stop the HR complaint, because he had apparently found out about it. I don't know how. And he had figured out she was behind it. He was telling her it was going too far. He was telling her I hadn't done anything to deserve this. He was asking her to withdraw it for both their sakes. At the bottom, he had written, "She doesn't know it was you who filed it. Please just let it go. I'll handle the rest." I took a photo of the screen with my cell phone, sent it to Dennis, sent it to Paulette. Then I made my coffee and went back upstairs before Darius appeared. I did not confront him. I did not mention the tablet. I just added the photo to the file. That afternoon, I sent Darius a text. "You have until Saturday to have your things out of this house." He called 6 times before 7 in the evening. I answered the first one and said there was nothing to discuss, then blocked the number. I didn't call my mother. I was not trying to protect her. I just did not have the bandwidth to carry her worry on top of everything else. And I knew if I told her what was happening, she would worry loudly, and I could not afford loud right now. Tamara told her anyway. My mother, Claudette, called me on a Tuesday evening, and I answered, and she asked me one question. "Are you okay?" I said I was managing. She said, "I'm coming Thursday." I said she didn't need to do that. She said, "Thursday. I'll need a key if yours is still under the same pot." She drove 3 hours. She showed up at my door with a casserole dish and a tote bag, and no drama whatsoever. She put the food in the refrigerator, looked at my apartment. I had already put down a deposit on a new place and moved most of my things, and said the light was good in here. We didn't talk about any of it the first night. She watched television. I worked. She made tea at 9 o'clock, and we sat together for an hour not saying much, and it was, genuinely, the most restoring thing that had happened in 3 weeks. The second night was different. I had come home from a particularly grinding day, and I sat down at the kitchen table and my mother looked at me across it and said, "You want to know something I never told you or your sister?" I said yes. She told me about a man before my father. Her first marriage, which I'd known about only as a bare fact, that it had happened and ended before she met my dad. She had never explained why it ended. She explained it that night. The man had done something similar, not identical, but similar enough. She had stayed. She stayed for 3 years after she found out. She stayed because leaving felt impossible in a way that is hard to describe to someone who has always had more options than she did then. She stayed because she had people in her life telling her that marriage was work and difficulty was not a reason to go. She said, "I do not regret the life I built with your father, but I do regret those 3 years. Not because I wasn't strong enough to leave, because I had convinced myself that staying was the stronger choice, and it wasn't. I was just scared, and I dressed it up as commitment. She was not telling me what to do. She was very careful about that. She just put it on the table and let it sit there. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, "I'm not scared. I'm just tired." She said, "That's okay. Tired is allowed." She stayed 4 days. When she left, I stood at the door and watched her car until I couldn't see it anymore. On the 11th day, Gloria called me into her office at 3 in the afternoon. She closed the door. She sat down across from me. She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us and said, "The complaint has been reviewed and found to be unsubstantiated. There is no evidence that you accessed any records outside of your authorized scope. The matter is closed and will not appear in your personnel file." She paused. Then she said, "Not quite officially. Whoever filed this knew enough about your role to make it look credible, but they didn't know enough about how you actually worked to find anything real, because there was nothing real to find." I said, "Thank you, Gloria." She said, "Go home. Take the rest of today." I gathered my things. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. Then I called Paulette. I said, "It's done. Tell me where we are with the other women." Paulette said she had located 2 additional women from Renee's current firm. Both had expressed willingness to provide statements. Both had been watching Renee's departure unfold internally through a company memo and had reached out to Paulette directly after seeing it. I said, "Get their statements, full documentation. And then I need you to make sure everything is stored somewhere that doesn't depend on me." Paulette said, "Already planned." Monday morning, a contact I had at Darius's firm, his former executive assistant, a woman named Cassia, who had always been kind to me, and who had reached out privately the week prior to say she was sorry, and she understood more than she could say in writing, forwarded me an internal memo. The subject was Renee Okafor's departure, family health situation, effective immediately, wishing her well. The usual language that companies use when they need someone to be gone and they need the story to be clean. I read the memo at my desk. I set my phone face down. I finished the contract review I was in the middle of. I made a note on 2 clauses that needed flagging. I submitted my comments by 10:30. At 2 in the afternoon, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Encrypted sender. But I knew before I opened it. The subject line was 2 words, "You won." The message was longer, angrier than I expected, less polished than everything I had seen from her before. She said I had destroyed her career over a personal matter that was none of my business. She said I could have handled this privately, woman to woman, with some basic dignity. She said what happens between adults doesn't need to become a public spectacle. She said she hoped I felt good about what I had done. I read it completely. Then I saved it to a folder I had labeled documentation and left it there. 3 days later, I opened that folder and wrote a reply. 4 words. "Actions have consequences, Renee?" I hit send. Then I opened a new message thread and added 3 names to it. Gwendolyn, who had reached back out to Paulette 2 weeks earlier, after hearing that the complaint against me had been filed and dismissed, and who had decided that the NDA was not going to protect her from this particular woman forever. And 2 women from Renee's current firm, Anita and Priscilla, whose written statements Paulette had collected and documented and stored properly. I introduced myself briefly in the thread. I told them who I was and how I had gotten to where I was. I told them I wasn't asking anything from them. I just thought they should know each other existed. Then I told them Paulette's name and said she had a complete file that she was holding securely, and that if any of them ever wanted to use it for anything, they had that option. I said, "I'm stepping back from this now, but what we built is not going anywhere." Then I closed the thread and put my phone in my bag and made dinner. I did not need to be in the middle of whatever happened next. I had done what I needed to do. The rest belonged to the people who had been waiting longer than I had. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday in late May. Darius and I sat on opposite sides of a conference table at my attorney's office. His lawyer was a quiet man in a gray suit who spoke mostly in head nods. Mine was a woman named Adrian, who had handled everything with zero sentiment and complete precision, which was exactly what I had needed from her. We signed for 40 minutes. The house sale had already closed. A young couple had put in an offer the third week it was listed and paid nearly asking price. We had split everything according to what we'd each contributed. It was not complicated because neither of us had the energy to make it complicated. Darius asked in the hallway after if he could say something. I said he could. He said he was sorry. He said it in the specific way that people say sorry when they mean, I am sorry this happened to me, not entirely, I am sorry I did this to you. I have learned to hear the difference. He said he hadn't known really what Renee was, what kind of person she was underneath the professional surface, that he had been flattered and then slowly in over his head and then too far gone to see clearly, and he knew that wasn't an excuse. I listened. Then I said, I hope you figure out what you actually need from people, Darius. And I hope the next time someone offers it to you, you check the cost first. I took the elevator down to the parking level. I sat in my car for a moment, not crying, just sitting. Then I drove to my apartment. It was a third-floor unit in a building with tall windows and not enough closet space, but I had filled it with things I had chosen without negotiating with anyone, arranged the way I wanted them, and it smelled like the candle I had bought myself the weekend I moved in, which was cedar and something faintly like rain. I put my bag down. I kicked off my shoes. I sat on the couch in the quiet for a while. It was genuinely a relief. 3 months later, I was at a rooftop fundraiser for a workforce development nonprofit that the hospital supported. It was a warm evening in late summer, the kind that doesn't get dark until almost 9 o'clock, and the city looked good from that height. Gloria found me near the end of the night. She had a glass of wine and a look on her face that said she had information she was deciding whether to share. Gloria is not a gossip, so when she decides to share something, it usually means she thinks the person she's sharing it with has earned the right to know. She said, I heard something interesting last week. Do you know Renee Okafor? I said I did. She said, she applied for a senior operations role at a regional health system up north. Good position. They were apparently very interested. But when they ran references and did their full review, the kind that takes a few weeks and goes a few layers deeper than people expect, it didn't move forward. Nobody made an announcement. It just went quiet. She looked at me. I said, Is that right? She said, I thought you'd want to know. I thanked her. She moved on to another conversation. I stood at the railing for a moment looking at the city and then went and got myself a glass of water and found the colleague I'd been talking to before Gloria appeared, and we finished the conversation we'd been in the middle of about a staffing policy that needed updating. Later that night, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, sounding the way she sounds when she's already comfortable somewhere. Not asleep, just settled. We talked for a little over an hour. She told me about her neighbor's garden drama and a book she'd started and a minor issue with her back that she had already handled and did not need me to worry about. I told her about the fundraiser, about the building, about a project at work I was actually excited about. She said, You sound like yourself. I said, Yeah, I think I do. We said goodnight. I washed my face and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark in my apartment that was mine, in a life I was building back towards something honest and quiet and real. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.